ensure that our climate agenda aligns with economic growth, specifically in areas that are most likely to experience radical change in their economic infrastructure.
Sure. In Newfoundland, there are probably a couple of different major issues. The first is the fishery, which is a major issue. I often say when I go to Newfoundland and Labrador, the Government of Canada is the Department of Fisheries and Oceans. I mean, it is far more present in that particular province than any other province in Canada, although it is a major department in all of Atlantic Canada. And so the impacts of climate change on fishery is a really important issue. And then, of course, the other major industry in Newfoundland and Labrador is the offshore oil and gas sector. And of course, there are other things, but those are two of the biggest. In the context of fisheries, this is really, really complex and not simple, because we have all kinds of things going on in the ocean. It used to be that we had to manage for a certain number of variables, and one of the big ones was how many fish do you allow people to catch, and how many lobsters do you allow people to catch. And managing that was not always a science. Sometimes it was a bit of an art, but it was at least within the realm of what you could reasonably estimate. With climate change, it's a lot more challenging, because the ecosystems and the environmental conditions are changing. And so climate change adds a whole new variable to fisheries management that we didn't have 20 or 30 years ago. And so one of the things we as a department are doing is increasingly trying to figure out how to incorporate predictions around what's going to happen in the oceans, temperature, salinity, all of those kinds of things, into what we think that impact is going to be on various fish stocks, in order for us to actually assess and then set total allowable catches. That's a much more complicated process. And it requires greater investments in scientific capacity, both between us and Environment Canada, who do a lot of the climate modeling. And it also requires us to be even better around some of the other estimating we're doing. And so you saw last fall, we announced another $110 million to be invested in the fish stocks provisions in the new Fisheries Act, which is really about enhancing our ability to do stock assessment and those kinds of things. We have to manage the fishery in a manner that's sustainable. If we do not do that, all we are doing is eliminating future employment opportunities for harvesters. And so while it sometimes is difficult, that if science tells us we have to reduce the catches, it is in the long-term best interest of everybody that there is sustainability. I think the big issue for us is finding ways to actually have conversations with people who are invested in that industry so that they actually come to a view about this themselves. My department, I think, at times has made decisions in the past without fully being able to engage harvesters and other stakeholders, and you end up with backlash where people don't understand and they're angry and it affects their livelihoods. We need to be better at engaging and incorporating fish harvesters and other stakeholders into the conversations around what the science is telling us so that we come up with collective solutions. And that's something that we are going to have to do in the fisheries area, in all of the biodiversity conversations. I mean, I announced last week the new measures with respect to self-resident killer whales. When we announced it a year before, there was a lot of controversy. There were some groups that were quite upset with us in the industry side. This time we actually forced a multi-stakeholder process where we invited people to the table, environmental organizations, industry, First Nations, whale watching companies, and we actually had them talk to each other about solutions, about the problem set and what are some of the solutions that you could come to. And when I made that announcement, all the commercial vessel people were there, the environmental organizations were there, the whale watching folks were there, and they were all supportive of what we were doing. Bottom line was it was the right ecological answer, but it was done in a way where you could actually ensure that you were managing the effects as much as you possibly could. And so I think that's one of the things that we will have to do in areas where we are trying to do this, is have better science and better ways of engaging people in conversations. On the oil and gas side of things, I mean, it's not just Newfoundland, but it's also Alberta and Saskatchewan, and to a certain extent British Columbia. I mean, the use of hydrocarbons is not going to end overnight. And in some parts, you know, the developing world, even under Paris, it doesn't peak until after the 2030s. But all of the areas that are firmly based on hydrocarbons need to have a longer term perspective on how they're going to build other parts of their economy. Because in an era of climate change, while there will be a transitional period, for sure, and that's measured in decades, not in years, ultimately, in order to address climate change, you are going to have to, over time, see some reduction in the use of hydrocarbon products. And so there needs to be thought about how you build an economy and use the time that we have right now through the transition to do that. I would say, probably shouldn't say this, but that you know, Premier Notley, I think, was quite thoughtful about that. She recognized that there was a need to look at other applications, other industries, other ways of using the resource. And I think that that's the kind of thinking that we're all going to need. And that's not just with hydrocarbons, it's also with other industries that may be less important in the future than they are today. So, and the federal government can certainly be a leader in those conversations. And it's certainly, you know, from my perspective, I mean, we're very willing to and very open to and do on an ongoing basis engage with the provinces to talk about these issues around future economic development. Yes?